Yeah, so my name's Alex Hudson. I'm an energy efficiency surveyor, advisor, and a caseworker for the Heet project. And as Francis said, we work across various boroughs. We started in Waltham Forest, but we work in Enfield, to some extent in Redbridge and Haringey as well. And we're an energy efficiency advice, support, and practical organisation. So our core aims, when the organisation was set up in 1999, our core aims were to tackle climate change on a direct level, on a local level, and to tackle fuel poverty in the homes of people who are facing it. So, obviously, the reducing emissions people's homes, insulating people's homes, is addressing climate emissions. It is reducing the massive impact that domestic, heat loss from domestic homes does have towards heating, towards climate change. But also, it's a twin approach that we have, and that we're trying to address the homes. We work for people who are, broadly speaking, people on benefits, low income, pensioners, people with disabilities, people with long-term health problems, people who are vulnerable. So what we try and do is we have a holistic approach. So we visit people in their homes. We'll be carrying out a survey of their homes to see where they're needing improvements. So that might be improvements in heating, old inefficient heating systems, lack of insulation, so lack of loft insulation, no cavity wall insulation, solid walls without any insulation, wooden doors and windows, maybe single glazed windows that are drafty. And we're trying to address that in terms of doing measures. So we actually do measures in people's homes. We do draft proofing of doors and windows. We do loft insulation in some cases. We have a heating engineer who works for us, and we can sort of repair broken heating systems. But also, we'd be referring on to grant schemes for larger measures. So there are grant schemes that exist to fund larger energy efficiency measures in people's homes, broadly if they're in one of those groups. So low income, on benefits, disabled, sometimes pensioners, regardless of means, but not always. So those measures, we can refer people in and help them through the process. So people might need cavity wall insulation, might need loft insulation. External wall insulation is the thing that's quite active. We're quite active on at the moment. So insulating the outside of solid walls to reduce emissions through the walls, reduce heat loss through the walls. Helping people replace single glazed windows sometimes. Also replacing old and inefficient heating systems. Now, up to now, that's mainly been sort of replacing older gas boilers with newer condensing boilers, maybe replacing a boiler and a hot water cylinder with a single combi boiler. So reducing make a more efficient AA rated boiler, so that has less emissions in itself, reclaims a lot of the energy that it uses, but is also more efficient and cuts down the heating costs for the families, or whoever we're working for. But we're also looking at when we go into people's homes, we're trying to tackle it on all levels. So giving advice about heating controls, how people can reduce their energy use through better use of heating controls. Whether if there's a thermostat missing, maybe replacing the thermostat to give them more control. Explaining about timers, programmers and timers to help so they can utilize the system better and reduce their energy use. Changing people from older inefficient light bulbs to LEDs, that sort of thing, trying to tackle that. And also, advising people on, how to use heating in their home and how their home is losing heat, and giving them knowledge to enable them to sort of control their own situation. We'd also be looking at gas electric bills. At the moment, obviously, there's a huge crisis and a panic about gas and electricity prices. For most of the people we work for, this isn't a new thing. We've been dealing with thousands of people who've been in crisis with their energy bills for many years, who can't afford to pay. A lot of people on benefits, especially universal credit, couldn't afford to pay their energy bills before this.
Down?
Sorry?
The wholesale market.
Oh.
So also looking at, I mean, switching people's, so before this year, helping people switch to cheaper suppliers, looking at the tariffs they're on, seeing if there'd be cheaper tariffs they can get. There are sometimes discounts for people on some benefits, so helping them access those discounts on their bills. There's discounts on water bills if you're on a low income. So helping people understand and find out about those things and access them. And also advocating for people with their energy suppliers. So, I mean, one thing that a lot of people face is they're trying to work out problems with their bills, problems with their meters, and they're dealing with energy suppliers who are not answering the phones. That it's a complicated system. People find it difficult navigating through that. So we're helping people through that, helping them reduce fuel debt, set up payment plans, you know, speaking to the energy suppliers on their behalf, and then explaining to them how the system works. And finally, also signposting people where we go to a lot of people or refer to people, and we find that they're not on correct benefits. They're not accessing the help they can get. We know how to access help from things like home improvement agencies, citizens advice, benefits advice services, so pointing people in the right direction as well. So we're trying to tackle a sort of global problem locally by, you know, reducing emissions from people's homes, but also tackles people's fuel poverty sort of globally in a way by helping them face all the different problems that they're having on to do with heating and energy. It's difficult. I mean, we work across different boroughs, and we're having to access. We're a community benefit society, so we're a non-profit organisation. We're aiming to help people as much as possible, and everything we want to do everything for free for the people who use our services. So accessing funding can be difficult. There's not very many of us, but and sometimes it can feel like a drop in the ocean. I think one thing that's interesting about Heet is that, I mean, Giovanna's coming on from SELCE later, and there are other organisations across London and across the country like us, but not very many. And it'd be good if more organisations were set up in every borough, in every area, in every street to some extent. Local organisations, people helping themselves in that sense. So one thing we've done in the past is had workshops with groups of residents, sort of helping train them up, trying to train people as energy champions so that they can take on their neighbours' problems, you know, so that communities can be resilient in facing this situation. But it is an uphill battle. I mean, we do a tremendous amount of work and we help a lot of people, but it does feel like a drop in the ocean in that sense. I mean, across Enfield, I mean, it's you know, there's very few of us, and we can't do as much as we'd like. I think one thing we'd like to do is work with other organisations to sort of help encourage other things to set up and help people access resources and explain to people how to navigate the system, because there is help out there. There are grants out there. There are schemes we can refer people into to get help on their homes. There are discounts available. A lot of people don't know about them. This is one of the major problems. We go to people, and people there's a lack of knowledge and a lack of understanding of the system. And I think the more communication about these problems, the better. I mean, we're not able to kind of work for everybody, but we're happy to speak to everybody and give advice to everybody, enable them to kind of take more control of, you know, looking at their heating systems, looking at the house to see what insulation could be, to see how things could be improved. And Heet's always available to kind of help out and advise and speak to people on that level. I think that's pretty much explains our work. You asked about sort of excess heat in a sense. I mean, we're not kind of tackling that as a thing. But I mean, one thing that's interesting about insulation is that a lot of people don't realise that insulation to keep heat in during the cold months is also insulation to keep heat out during warm months. So that if you have a house that's very cold in the winter because there's no insulation, it's likely to be overheated in the summer because there's nothing keeping cold out. So insulation in itself is a two-way barrier, and that's something that isn't often considered, but it is helpful to people. One thing what we see a lot is people in ill health because of the conditions in their homes. So people are not able to heat their homes properly. people whose homes are old. A lot of housing stock is very old. It's got solid walls. It doesn't have good ventilation. It's prone to a lot of condensation. It's prone to mold, and it's prone to the health problems that come with mold. So that will have a massive impact on respiratory diseases. It can provoke things like chest complaints, and it can provoke things like skin complaints. So ill health and living with cold in itself is deadly. It's a situation that kills a lot of people, especially older people, over the winters, and people not being able to heat their homes because they are afraid of turning on the heating is a problem that's going to increase. It's not a new problem. It's a problem that we've seen faced in, year out, but more and more people now, not just the very poor, more and more people are going to face that choice as to whether they can heat their home or not, and that is going to have an impact on people's health, and that's what we're here hoping to address. So.
I thought I would step back a bit because what Heet done, in many ways, the work that Alex has described in terms of what Heet do is what we do in South East London. I think both of our organisations have very similar value systems, but also similar processes. And so I'm really glad that you got the local organisation to come and talk to you in detail about the work of alleviating fuel poverty, the work of energy justice. So in order to be a little bit different, and I thought maybe I'd take a little bit more of a climate perspective on this, because after all, you are the climate forum for Enfield. Because I think it's quite an important discussion to have in the context of what is happening, what's happening on a policy level. And I thought it would also be useful, Sydney, I've just launched this on you, but I have my colleague Sydney here who is from, again, another one of those organisations that comes from a very similar place in terms of values, in terms of understanding. And I thought it would be really useful to bring you in a little bit. So I just want to share a little, this is just some photographs actually. So I'm going to share a little slide deck. Let me just see, am I allowed to share? So first off, let's talk a little bit about, people often talk about fuel poverty and climate justice as different things. But we work in South East London. And our aim, the aim of my organisation and of Sydney's, and I imagine very much of Heet, is really one about addressing the climate crisis in a very locally relevant way. So I would just like to ask you, I love a bit of participation. Can I ask you, I'm going to describe what South East London is like, and it's very much, in many ways, very similar to Enfield. South East London is an area of huge inequalities. We have areas like Blackheath, where Liz Truss lives, apparently, that are extremely wealthy. I mean, you can't get a house. You can't buy a house in Blackheath for less than £2 million. And Blackheath sits alongside areas like Deptford, which are areas of huge deprivation, but also areas of rapid gentrification. So there's huge amount of tensions there. Now, I'm going to ask you guys a question, and it's also relevant to Enfield. If you were to address the climate crisis in South East London, what do you think most needs to happen? So what do you think most needs to change? Answers in the chat, please.
Okay, if you type in the chat, you should be able to.
So education, yes. Practical changes. What needs to happen in terms of, well, let's think about energy systems, local, so ownership. So we need to change the way the ownership structure. Yes. Easy payments for upgrades. Yes. So we're talking about domestic retrofit. Yep. Any other thoughts? Better insulation. Improve insulation. Giving people control over their heating systems. Yes. And housing conditions. Yes. Any other thoughts? Increasing prices, the more power used. That's interesting. So, clear lines of information, absolutely. Any other thoughts? So I'm just going to give you 30 seconds to any other remaining thoughts. Better and public, better, yes, absolutely. We need to think about transport. We need to think about this. We're not going to tackle. The revolution is never going to happen in silos. Get rid of the Tories. Yeah, well, yes. My organisation is meant to be totally apolitical. We work across 2 Tory boroughs and 2 Labour ones. So don't let Bromley and Bexley here say that I agreed with get rid of the Tories. Yes, give people a power allowance related to age and health conditions. So that's interesting. So you're talking about universal basic services. So I would agree with you. Less waste. Absolutely. I would agree with you on every front. Funding. What my organisation, when we came together, we spent a lot of time going, well, what needs to happen here? What is our vision for an energy future in South East London? And the answer that we came up with is all of the things that you talked about, but also very, very much about not leaving anyone behind. We believe that we cannot tackle the climate crisis without tackling inequalities. There are huge inequalities in energy. And they are intersectional inequalities that in many ways apply across the board. That if you are on a low income, you will pay more for your energy. You will require more energy because your house is likely to have poorer insulation. And you will also need to pay in a way that is more expensive. Similarly, the impacts of climate, excess heat and excess cold, are going to hit you harder. And those, and I think we have to acknowledge that the intersectional nature of the injustice, that if you are on a low income, you are more likely to face other forms of inequality. You are more likely to be black or brown. You are more likely to have a disability. And I think what's happening now, and it's quite interesting what's happening in terms of the climate crisis, and the energy crisis, that essentially what has needed to happen in order to tackle the climate crisis is make fossil fuels more expensive. The reason why that hasn't happened so far is that the reason why we haven't been putting extra taxes on fossil fuels is because what will happen if you do is thousands of people will die. One of the things I'm sure my Alex mentioned is that if people, cold homes shorten lives. If people are living in cold homes and they are vulnerable to the effects of the cold, they are older, younger, have a health condition, it will shorten their life. And there are huge injustices in that. So we have always thought that tackling the climate crisis, it is a question of tackling injustices. They are intimately linked. You can't talk about tackling fuel poverty and tackling climate crisis as 2 separate things. They are a single thing. And and it's for that reason that was the value system upon which my organisation, South East London, was set up. Oh, I haven't actually started the slideshow. Slideshow from beginning. So in many ways, I've butchered a quote from Emma Goldman here, who said, "If I can't dance, I don't want to be part of your revolution." In many ways, our founding principle was if your energy revolution leaves people behind, we want no part of it. In many ways, our way of tackling climate crisis is about tackling energy justice. So let's talk about the current crisis, shall we? Again, a little bit of audience participation here. I'm sure you all know the wholesale price of gas has gone up. I'd quite like to know why. What do you think is causing the increase in gas and electricity prices? Put your answers in the chat. Greed, exploitation, yes. Be a bit more specific though. Is it profits and shareholders? Yes. So it's because we have a fully marketized system. There is no control over the wholesale price of gas. Yes. Combination of supply shortage and speculation. Now that's interesting. So Elaine, what has driven, can you pop in the chat what you think has driven the supply shortage? Bad regulations, yes. Not enough competition in the market. Well, the energy market is actually, it's very difficult to talk about the energy market. What we've got people who generate electricity, who mine it essentially, who extract it from the ground, people like BP. You've got people who distribute the transmission and distribution operators, and then you've got the suppliers, and those are the people who you have contact with. So, and all of those are essentially set up as competitive markets. Where is there not enough competition, Lisa? Yeah. So it's about market failure. So I'm seeing stuff about monopolistic market. Yes, transmission and distribution is monopolistic. Denationalized, lacking control over the extraction subsidies to companies who get subsidies and pay no tax. Yes, you're right. I'm gonna everything you've put in there is right. What has happened recently is that essentially the thing that has driven the increase in prices is an increase in demand from Asia, principally. China and many other Asian countries are seeking to reduce their carbon emissions by shifting to gas. We've also got more developed countries are developing. They want to go along the same development pathways that we have. They're demanding more gas. So there is essentially a shortage in gas. There has been also a shortage that's driven in some increased demand is also driven by a decreased yield from wind in Asia. As the temperature heats up, one of the impacts of the climate crisis is that we'll get less wind. In many ways, the increase, this is stretching it a bit, but everyone who works in the energy sector has been expecting a price rise of this kind. We didn't know when it would come along.
Giovanna, I'm going to stop the sharing because your slides aren't moving forward on this for some reason. So I'm just going to have you on the screen without the slides, okay?
They haven't moved forward simply because I haven't got no.
Oh, I thought they. Okay.
Right. Okay. Right. So I'm going to wrap up in a little bit because I'm only going to. So basically, I wanted to give you some background about what has happened and that everything that what is currently happening is intimately connected to the climate crisis. What I want to suggest is that what we need is an integrated local solution, and what SELCE is trying to do is create that. So in response to the climate crisis, in response to the fuel crisis, and we have been doing this for many, many years, we provide advice for, we provide advice to our vulnerable clients. We put a lot of effort into identifying those people who are most in need of, who are most vulnerable to the effects of the cold. We do all the same things that Heet does, and it's extremely important work at the moment. Is it enough? I don't know, maybe Alex will disagree here, but no matter what we do right now, so every pound we save a client is a pound that they can spend on energy. There is almost no way that we can, with all the tricks of the trade that Alex described, there is no way we can reduce somebody's energy bills by the amount which they are going to increase this year. However, it is extremely important work. And I think what I imagine that Alex will say is that, you know, all the people here need to be aware of what is provided locally and make sure that they're referring people who, without having help, may well, essentially what happens when you're in a cold home is it exacerbates existing conditions, and it will shorten lives. Another thing that we are doing is there is this lady here is a teacher. What you've got here is she's looking delighted because we are able to reduce her bills. One of the things that I think everyone should be aware of is that there is no price cap on the bills for schools, community centres, hospitals, all of our local institutions. The energy prices will be going up for them, and there is no cap on that. One of the things that we do as an organisation is we install solar and LEDs. So we use something called community finance. We essentially we're a cooperative, we go out to our local community and we say, in essence, lend us money. What we're selling is in fact equity in SELCE, but essentially what we use that money to do is install solar or install LEDs. We then charge the site for solar electricity or for lighting at a reduced rate to what they would otherwise be paying. So this in many ways is a response for our community organisations. And Sydney, can I just bring you in here because you're doing a lot of work locally of a similar vein?
Hi. Yeah, I belong to Energy and N10. We do similar work. We're a lot smaller than SELCE as regards solar, but we have done some community investments, and we're helping a synagogue at the moment in Muswell Hill to do a similar thing. So yeah, it was very, very difficult to be able to do it and offer a lower price than the electricity companies. But now it's switched round, and it should be quite easy to do this and really reduce people's prices. The difficulty now is there's a supply chain shortage, but you know, we all struggle on.
Yeah. So the last thing that we're doing is really helping people who are, as many of you identified, what really needs to happen is retrofit. So through our fuel poverty alleviation services, our energy advice, we're enabling low income people to get hold of grants to insulate their homes. We also do a lot of advocacy with social and private landlords to make sure that they meet the decent home standards. But we also work with people who are able to pay for their retrofit. Right at the moment, we are working with we're experimenting with working with a whole street. So Gordon Brook Road in Lewisham is a street where all the houses are Victorian, identically shaped houses. And we're working with the whole street to enable them to work together So using a bit of peer support. And again, this is something that you guys up north might think about doing. We also offer a one-to-one advice service and thermal imaging for any clients, anyone, and it's a at cost service. And again, as Sydney has mentioned, what we've seen is a massive uptake in interest in insulation. And I think one of the things that's really important for the Environment Forum to recognise is that this is a unique period. It's dreadful. I'm talking to people every day who are in absolute bits. They just don't know what to do. They have to have the heating on because they have a health condition, or their kid has sickle cell anemia or asthma, or they have a rheumatoid arthritis and they simply cannot afford to do it. It is terrible, but it is also an opportunity. There is massive interest in from domestic properties to install, and this is something that. So we have a partnership with Muswell Hill Sustainability Forum, where our retrofit coordinator is able to go over and support houses up in your area as well. But again, I think I would encourage you as a collective to think about, well, how can we use the opportunities this has presented? Suddenly, lots of people installing solar, installing external wall insulation, internal wall insulation, all of those sort of whole house retrofit measures are suddenly becoming financially rational.
Giovanna, can we find a little time for questions as well? Because we've got other things we need to deal with in
Alrighty.
that time.
I haven't kept time very well, have I? So I'm going to wrap up there. That's what we do as an organisation. And I suppose that the point that I wanted to make, and I thought would be useful to you, is really to think about the connections between all of these things. The climate crisis, the fuel crisis, they are intimately connected. What we need is a holistic solution.